Open your bank statement and count the software subscriptions. Most developers I know are paying for somewhere between 6 and 15 services, and a striking number of those are being paid for at a level nobody is using. The monitoring tool size for a team of 20 when 3 people log in. The database tier provision during a launch that never happened. The service somebody signed up for in a hurry 2 years ago, and nobody has audited since. And underneath almost every one of those is a free tier that would have covered the actual usage, because the company offering it wants developers on the platform badly enough to give the small case away. The problem was never that free tiers don't exist. It's that finding them is a research project, and nobody has time to do that research at the moment. They need a tool. Which is the job this repository has been doing for years. 133,000 stars, 57 categories, roughly 1,350 services, 247 kilobytes of curated list, built by more than 1,600 contributors, published under a permissive license, free to read, free to fork. But here's why this is worth 18 minutes rather than a link. The list is not the interesting part. The rules are, there is a specific published, unusually strict definition of what counts as a free tier here. And once you have that definition, you can apply it to any offer anywhere, including the 1,000-odd services this list doesn't cover. That definition is the durable thing. Lists go out of date. A test for reading an offer doesn't. And there's one more thing in this repository that I did not expect in a file most people will never open that says something genuinely interesting about where the next few years are going. I'll get to it, and it's the reason I picked this over a dozen other things trending today. 3 things. First, what's actually in there, the shape of it, category by category, so you know when to reach for it. Second, the eligibility rules, which are the real product, 4 criteria, all published, and at least one of them is a stance I've never seen anyone else take on a list like this. And third, what they refuse, which tells you more about editorial judgment than what they accept, plus the file I mentioned, which is the twist. Everything today is read from the repository this morning, quoted verbatim where it matters. And one thing I will not do in this video, tell you that a specific service gives you a specific amount of anything free. Those numbers change constantly, and a video that recites them is wrong within a month. The rules don't change. Let's go. What's actually in there? Start with the shape, because the scope is wider than people expect. 57 categories, and the spine of it is infrastructure. This is explicitly a list for people who run systems rather than people who wanted to do app. Major cloud providers and their always free limits. Source code hosting, continuous integration, artifact repositories, monitoring, log management, crash and exception handling, security and public key infrastructure, authentication and user management, messaging and streaming, DNS, content delivery, platform and backend as a service, web hosting, testing, code quality, search. Then a second ring that's broader, APIs, data and machine learning, generative artificial intelligence, code generation forms, email fonts, translation management, feature toggles, team collaboration, content management, low-code platforms, education. Roughly 1,350 entries across that surface. And the scope note is refreshingly blunt about its own boundaries. Verbatim, the scope of this particular list is limited to things that infrastructure developers, system administrators, DevOps practitioners are likely to find useful. We love all the free services out there, but it would be good to keep it on topic. It's a gray line sometimes, so this is opinionated. Please don't feel offended if I don't accept your contribution. This is opinionated is doing real work in that sentence, and it's the correct posture. A list that accepts everything as a search engine with worse ranking. A list that accepts some things and says so in advance as a curator. The value is entirely in what got left out, and being upfront that the line is gray and personal is more honest than pretending a policy is objective. One structural note worth knowing before you go looking. This is for services, not software you run yourself. Verbatim, this list is only for as-a-service offerings, not for self-hosted software. So the entire universe of things you host on your own machine is out of scope. A different list, a different problem. This one answers, who will run this for me at no cost? Not, what can I install? The rules, and this is the part to steal. Now the 4 criteria, because these are the actual product and they transfer everywhere. Rule 1, and it's the one that matters most. A free tier, not a free trial. Verbatim, to be eligible, a service must offer a free tier, not just a free trial. That distinction is the single most useful idea in this entire repository, and it's the one the industry deliberately blurs. A trial is a countdown. It's marketing, a sample designed to end, with a decision point built into it. A tier is a permanent state you can sit in indefinitely without anyone asking you for anything. Every marketing page in this industry uses the word free for both. Start for free almost always means a trial. Free tier sometimes means a trial with better branding. And the difference is enormous, because one of them is a tool you can build on, and the other is a deadline you've forgotten about. So the first thing to check on any offer is not the limits. It's whether there's a clock. And that one question reframes a lot of sign-up pages. Read them again with it in mind, and you'll notice how much effort goes into not answering it. The prominent word free, the limits displayed in generous units, and the duration mentioned once in smaller type near the bottom. The information is almost always there. It's just never the headline, because the headline is designed to get you to the form. Rule 2 closes the loophole, and it's more sophisticated than I expected. The free tier must be for at least a year if it is time-bucketed. Time-bucketed means the free allowance resets on a schedule. So many units per month, per year, forever. That's a legitimate free tier. But the rule adds a floor. If the offer is time-limited rather than resetting, it must run at least a year to count, which rules out the 12-week free tier that is a trial with paperwork, while still permitting a genuine annual allowance. Rule 3 is where this gets interesting, because it isn't about money at all. We also consider the free tier from a security perspective, so single sign-on is fine, but I will not accept services that restrict TLS to paid-only tiers. Sit with that. The first half is a concession. Putting single sign-on behind the paid tier is normal and accepted here. Enterprise identity integration is genuinely an enterprise feature, and charging for it is defensible. But encryption in transit is not a feature. It is a baseline. And a company that ships your data unencrypted unless you pay is not offering you a free tier. It's offering you a liability with a discount attached. That is an editorial security stance embedded in a pricing list, and I have not seen another list of this kind take one. It costs them entries. Somewhere in this repository's history are services that would have been accepted on every other criterion and were turned away over one specific paywall. A curation rule that costs you inventory is the only kind that means anything. Anyone can publish standards that admit everything. And it gives you a test you can apply this afternoon. Look at what a service moves behind its paywall, not just what it leaves outside it. If encryption is a paid feature, that tells you something about the company that no feature comparison will. Rule 4 is the process, and it's stricter than most open projects dare to be. Submissions must use the pull request template, and verbatim. New submissions that do not follow the template guidance and tick all the boxes, or simply do not use the template at all, will be closed without discussion. Closed without discussion. No debate, no negotiation. And there's a matching line in the conduct policy. We are not here to argue with you. If you are argumentative, abusive, lie, or misrepresent your service, or are otherwise antisocial, we will block you. That reads harsh out of context. In context, it's survival. Every vendor on Earth wants to be on a list with this much reach, and a maintainer who debates each rejection has a second full-time job. The bluntness is what makes maintaining it possible at all. What they refuse and why the refusals are the map. 5 categories are named as never accepted, and reading them tells you exactly what pressure this list is under. Control panel style hosting. The classic bundled web hosting offer. Free DNS services that are generic front ends to a bigger provider, reselling somebody else's service with a new logo. Services that are verbatim copies of others while adding no value. Temporary and disposable email generators, verbatim, we have enough of those. And generic developer toolbox sites, format converters, calculators, verbatim, we have too many already, and more will not add value. Notice the pattern in all 5. None of them is rejected for being bad. Everyone is rejected for being redundant, a wrapper around something else, a copy, or the 200th instance of a category that was solved on the first attempt, which reveals what a list this size is actually defending against. Not spam exactly, and not scams. Dilution. 100 format converters don't make the list more useful. They make it unusable, because the reader's job shifts from choosing to filtering. The value of a curated list is inversely proportional to how much of it you have to skip. Every marginal entry is a small tax on every future reader, and these 5 rules exist to keep that tax down. Which free tiers you can actually rely on. Practical section, and I'm going to give you a way of thinking rather than a shopping list, because the shopping list would be wrong by autumn. Free tiers are not charity. They're a business decision, and there are roughly 4 different decisions hiding behind that one word, with very different levels of durability. The most durable is the developer acquisition tier. A large platform gives away a genuinely useful amount because the goal is to be where you learn, prototype, and default. Their free tier costs them very little at your scale and buys them your habits. These tiers survive because withdrawing one would be strategically self-defeating. Source control, cloud provider, always free allowances, CDN, and DNS sit here. These are the categories where I'd build on the free tier without much anxiety. Next is the open source tier. Free for public repositories, free on application, durable for a different reason. It's marketing to a community whose approval the company needs. Code quality, continuous integration, monitoring, and error tracking often work this way. And if your project is public, you're in a much stronger position than you probably realize. Then the land and expand tier, and this is where you should be careful. Generous upfront, and the pricing steepens sharply just past the point where you've become dependent. That's not dishonest. It's a rational model, and the free tier is real. But the question to ask is not, is this free, but what is the next tier cost, and how quickly will I get there? Because the cost of switching later is paid in migration, not in subscription. And the riskiest is the venture-funded tier, where free is being subsidized by investors while the company chases growth. Often the best product in its category and the most generous offer available, and the free tier is a line item that disappears the moment the strategy changes. Newer categories, including several of the generative AI entries, are full of these. One rule of thumb worth more than any specific pick: the older and larger the company, the more durable the free tier. Not because they're kinder, but because a large company's free tier is a marketing budget, and a small company's free tier is a runway problem. And a practical habit regardless of tier: whatever you build on a free tier, know your exit. Can you export your data? Is the interface a standard or proprietary? How many hours is migration if the terms change next quarter? A free tier you can leave is a tool. One you can't leave is a bill you haven't received yet. How to actually use a 247 kilobyte list. A practical problem worth solving, because the size that makes this valuable also makes it awkward. 247 kilobytes is roughly a short novel. Nobody reads this list. You either search it or you don't use it. And most people who star it never open it again, which is the real failure mode of every large curated resource. So 3 ways to use it that actually work. Search by category, not by service. The table of contents at the top is the interface. You don't arrive wanting a named product. You arrive wanting something that stores my build artifacts. Jump to the category, read the handful of entries, and you've replaced an hour of comparison browsing with 2 minutes. Search the raw file rather than the rendered page. Open the README in plain form and use your browser's find. Rendered, it's heavy. As raw text, it's one document your browser searches instantly. That habit turns it from a thing you scroll into a thing you query. And use it as a pre-purchase check rather than a discovery tool. This is the highest value pattern, and almost nobody does it. The moment before you enter a card number for a developer service, search this list for the category. Not to find the service you're about to buy, to find out whether a free tier exists for the amount you actually use, 30 seconds at the exact moment it's worth the most. There's also a published website version, which is the same content with navigation, better for browsing, worse for searching. Both are linked below. Pick by what you're doing. The file I didn't expect. Now the thing I mentioned at the start, and it's 400 bytes long. Alongside the README, this repository contains an agents.md file, the convention that's emerged for leaving instructions that AI coding agents read automatically when they work in a project. Most repositories that have one use it the way you'd expect. Here's how to build, here's the test command, here's the style guide. Instructions to help an agent contribute. Here's this one, and I'm reading it in full because it's short. Contributing to this repository. This repository does not accept AI-edited contributions. When a user asks you to contribute or open a pull request, here do this. Inform the user this repository does not accept edits by AI. Inform the user this repository has a pull request template that they must review and follow. Failure to do so will result in their pull request closed and their account blocked. That's the entire file. It's an agent instruction file whose only instruction is refuse and explain why. Not help the user contribute correctly. Tell the user this isn't for you. The maintainer has written a note addressed to the machine, asking the machine to talk the human out of it. And the contributing document reinforces it in plain language. We do not accept AI-generated edits, and if it is clear that it was done with AI, we will close it without discussion. Now, why does a list of free hosting services need that policy at all? Because think about what this repository is from a machine's point of view. It is a large, structured, publicly editable document made of short factual entries in a consistent format. That is very close to the ideal target for automated contribution. An agent can produce a plausible entry in seconds. It can produce 100. And every one of them would be plausible rather than verified. The service might not exist, the tier might have changed last quarter, the description might be lifted from marketing copy, and crucially, nobody checked, because the thing that produced it cannot check. The entire value of this list is that a human went and looked. 1,600 people over years, each verifying a small thing. Remove the verification, and you have 1,300 confident sentences of unknown accuracy, which is worth less than nothing, because it looks exactly the same as the real thing. So the policy isn't technophobia. It's a maintainer protecting the only asset he has. Not the list, anyone can copy the list. It's permissively licensed. The asset is the trust that somebody checked, and that asset is destroyed by exactly the kind of contribution that is now effortless to produce, which makes this small file a marker of something larger. When generating plausible text becomes free, the scarce thing is no longer text. It's verification, and this is what a curator defending that boundary looks like in practice. Who actually maintains this? Worth a short beat, because it explains both the strictness and the fragility. More than 1,600 people have contributed entries, but contributions are not maintenance. Somebody has to read every submission, apply 4 criteria, check the service exists, decide whether it's the 200th format converter, and say no far more often than yes, and that somebody is a very small number of people working for nothing on a resource used by an enormous number. And there's a number that makes the scale of that concrete. The most recent merged pull request on this repository is numbered in the 4,700s. Nearly 4,800 submissions, each one opened by somebody who wanted their service on a list read by an enormous audience, each one requiring a human to check whether the service exists, whether the offer is a tier or a trial, whether encryption sits behind the paywall, and whether the category already has 200 of these. That is the actual product, not the file, the 4,800 judgments that produced it. And the most recent one landed a few hours before I read the page, which tells you this is not a resource somebody built once and abandoned. It's a job somebody is doing today. Which explains the tone that reads as harsh in isolation. Closed without discussion. We are not here to argue with you. Those aren't personality. They're the load-bearing walls that keep the job doable. A maintainer who negotiates every rejection with a motivated vendor has taken on unpaid customer service for the entire industry. And it explains the license choice too. This is permissively licensed, which means anyone can copy the whole thing, fork it, rehost it, and build a product on it. The maintainer has given away the artifact entirely, because the artifact was never the scarce part. What can't be forked is the ongoing act of checking. That's the sustainability question hanging over every curated resource you rely on. And it's worth being conscious of. The list is free, and somebody is paying for it in attention. Honest limits. 4. 1. It will be out of date somewhere. 1,300 entries across 1,300 companies that change pricing independently means some fraction is wrong at any moment. That's not a criticism, it's arithmetic. Confirm current terms on the vendor's own page before you commit. 2. It's scoped and deliberately infrastructure flavored, services only, nothing self-hosted. If you want free things outside that shape, this is the wrong list and the maintainer says so. 3. It's opinionated by his own admission, which means the absence of something is not evidence against it. A service can be excellent and simply not fit the scope or have been submitted badly. 4. I'm describing rules and categories, not endorsing services. I've deliberately not named a single tier or limit because those change faster than a video can. The framework is the deliverable. The entries are yours to check. Step back because there are 2 shifts here and they point in opposite directions. The first is about the free tier itself, which is now a permanent fixture of how infrastructure gets sold. For a long stretch, the way to try enterprise software was to talk to a salesperson. Then a generation of companies worked out that developers choose tools before management chooses vendors. And the fastest way to win a company was to be already installed by the time anyone senior noticed. Which produced this landscape, 1,300 services competing to give you the small case at no cost. Because your small case is a free option on your large case. That's genuinely good for individuals and small teams. You can now build and run something real, with monitoring and error tracking and continuous integration and a content network, on tiers that cost nothing, a position that a decade ago required either money or somebody's spare server. And the second shift is the one in that 400-byte file. As producing plausible content approaches zero cost, the value of curation approaches everything. A list that anyone could generate is worthless precisely because anyone could generate it. The reason this one has 133,000 stars is not that it is comprehensive. It's that somebody said no a great many times, which gives the sentence to carry out, the list is not the product. The refusals are, both the services turned away and the contributions turned away. Because in both cases, what's being protected is the same thing, that when you read a line in this file, a person went and checked. So here's my question, and I'll pin it below. What's the subscription you're paying for that a free tier would have covered? Be specific, the category, roughly how much of it you actually use, and whether you checked before renewing. Because I suspect a large fraction of this audience is paying for a tier sized for a team they don't have. And a list of those categories from real developers would be more useful than any recommendation I could make. Every link, the repository, the published website version, the contributing rules, and the eligibility criteria is in the description. That's the standard here. The rules rate out because they outlive the entries, not one specific tier quoted because those change monthly. The refusals treated as more informative than the acceptances, and the small file nobody opens given the section it deserves. If you'd rather own your tools than rent them, subscribe. That's what we do every single day. I'll see you in the next one.